Hi, and welcome to the Mindful Living Summit. My name is Kaylee Isaacs. I'm the founder of the Awake Network, and I'll be your host for this session. Today, we're exploring what mindfulness is and how to get started. And I'm happy to be here with Dr. Parneet to talk about mindfulness, practice, and how we can make it a part of our life. Parneet is the Chief Science Officer at Wisdom Labs, a San Francisco-based company solving for stress, burnout, and loneliness in the workplace. She's a Harvard-trained physician, focusing on the intersection of lifestyle medicine, behavior change, and technology, and building wiser workplaces using the science of mindfulness, resilience, and compassion. Parneet, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you for having me, Kaylee. My pleasure.
I wonder if you could start off by just guiding us in a brief mindfulness meditation to get us started and help us drop in today.
Sure, I'd love to. And I thought since we're sort of exploring the foundations of mindfulness, my practice is going to help us come to a mindful moment, so to arrive in this present moment. And in order to understand this practice, it's really an understanding of what mindfulness is. So if you look at the root of the word mindfulness, it comes from to keep something in mind or to remember. So as you think about being mindful in any moment, what are we keeping in mind? We keep our breath, our body, our thoughts and emotions in mind. And that's sort of what we're going to do in the practice itself. But then also just to understand the point of that. So why do we want to keep our breath, body, thoughts and emotions in mind? When we do that, we notice that our mind usually tends to be running into thoughts of the past or thinking about thoughts of the future. And when we bring these things to mind, it allows us to come back to the present moment. And then when we find ourselves in that present moment, we can then see clearly. We can see clearly what's happening in front of us. We can understand the interactions with the people around us a little bit better, and then we can respond skillfully. So that's the whole basic point of, why even be mindful? So again, it's just to bring ourselves back to the present moment so that from that place, with that attention in the present moment, we can respond skillfully. So I'm going to invite you now to sit up straight in a posture that's alert yet relaxed, and close your eyes. And as you do so, I'm going to ask you a few questions that I want you to simply answer in your own mind. So the first question is, where are you right now? So literally, ask yourself, where are you right now? So maybe you're sitting in your office in San Francisco, and just taking this time to notice how often our mind and our bodies can be in very different places. So the first thing that we do as we arrive in this present moment is to bring our mind and body back to the same place. Next, I want you to check in with your breath in this moment. So what's the quality of your breathing? Are your breaths shallow, deep? Are you breathing fast or slow? Just taking this time to pay attention and notice your breathing. Next, I want you to check in with your body. So how is your body feeling right now? Are you feeling energized? Is your body feeling tired? Are you noticing some aches and pains somewhere? Whatever the case might be, we're simply noticing without trying to change anything. Next, let's move our attention to our thinking. So try and identify the broad themes of your thinking in this moment. So maybe you're having thoughts about this webinar. Maybe you're having some thoughts about your family or work. So just see if you can just step back and notice whatever may be arising without getting caught up in a particular thought. And now asking yourself, how do these thoughts make me feel? So checking in with your emotions in this present moment. Are you happy? Are you sad? Are you anxious? Are you stressed? Again, just noticing whatever is present. So as we arrive in this present moment, being mindful means we keep our breath, our body, our thoughts and emotions in mind, and allowing this moment to be as it is. With a sense of openness, curiosity, and kindness to whatever may be coming up. And from this place of greater focus and attention, go ahead and take a couple of slightly deeper breaths at your own pace. And whenever you're ready, you may open your eyes and come back to this conversation.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
I'm wondering, just having practiced more of a formal mindfulness meditation practice, how that might translate into the way that we can actually show up in our everyday lives, how that same sense of presence and clarity can actually translate from something that might be separated from our lives, where we go off and we have a moment of silence, into the very messy, busy parts of the day as well.
And that's a tough part, right, Kaylee? Because it's so much easier to sit in meditation, whatever your practice might be, and have those moments of feeling really calm and centered and ready for the day. And then you go into work and you have a stressful meeting, and all of your practice seems to go out the window. So I think the first step in trying to incorporate this kind of mindfulness practice into your daily life is to realize that, first of all, it's a practice. So to set your expectations, just like any other habit, it's going to take us time to incorporate this, to translate this into our daily activities. So again, starting with that attitude of mindfulness, of openness, curiosity, and kindness to ourselves, that's key. And then starting to see what are the little moments of mindfulness that we can start building into our day. So maybe, there's a couple of deep breaths that we can take before we start a phone call, or maybe if we are anticipating that this is going to be a difficult conversation with somebody, again, just taking a few seconds, doesn't have to be too long, of again, just deep breathing, or just taking the mindful moment that we did. And then in conversation or in any kind of activity, really, if we can start to become a neutral observer in that moment. And again, this gets easier with practice. Is, for example, right now I'm having this conversation with you, but at the back of my mind, I'm also sort of taking the opportunity to step back a little bit and observe, my body. I'm observing sort of the sensations that are coming up for me. I'm noticing how I'm feeling as I'm speaking to you. And so that sort of becomes more and more natural with practice. So again, it's, the more you practice, the more those neural connections get laid down in your brain, and the easier it becomes to start being a little more mindful, whether you're eating or walking or speaking to somebody.
So the formal practice is a sort of training that helps us to develop some of those capacities, and then we can bring those same capacities into moments in our daily life.
Exactly. And the exciting thing is that the benefits of mindfulness, and I know we're going to talk about this a little bit, but it's kind of a natural flow. So even though when you look at the studies and the research around the benefits of mindfulness, it can seem very formal, or it can seem very sort of separated. And I'll talk about the brain networks in the brain that get strengthened, but really what that translates into is your capacity to manage and navigate stress, your capacity to, when you're triggered, not take the bait in that moment and to pause before you speak or you do something, your capacity to empathize with others and show up in a more kind and forgiving way. So the benefits translate very organically and naturally, but I think it also helps to understand what's happening in your brain, because then it gives you a little more incentive to practice.
I think that'd be great to dive into. What are some of the benefits that science is showing about mindfulness practice and compassion practice?
We have now close to 25 years of research in these areas. And what's exciting is that we now know, we have very clear evidence that with consistent practice, and I'll underscore that, with consistent practice, we can strengthen broadly three brain networks. The first is our attention network. And when we strengthen our attention network, again, what does that mean? So great, I think I'll be able to pay a little more attention. Yes, of course. But your attention network is intimately tied to your emotional regulation networks, to your pro-social networks in the brain. So when you strengthen your attention networks, it means that in a moment of feeling frazzled, or when you're feeling stressed, or there's a lot of chaos around you, more and more you become the person who's able to stay calm, to stay focused, but also to prioritize what's important. We can get overwhelmed with so many things that are happening around us. Our technology doesn't help these days. So again, training our attention networks means that we have that kind of focus that we're looking for, the calm that we're looking for, and very importantly, and I think for most of us who work, we also have access to our creativity because our attention networks are tied to our ability to come up with insights and ideas. So that's the benefit of the strengthening your attention network. And then we also strengthen our emotional regulation networks. And what this means is that we become better at managing our stress response. So when we get triggered by something that's happening externally, or by a memory that comes up for us, we often go into the fight or flight stress mode, which is completely natural. It's a survival response. It's important if there's a car coming at us and we need to get out of the way. But often, this response also comes up in those emotionally stressful situations in our daily lives. And so when we strengthen, through the practice of mindfulness, our emotional regulation networks, then it means that the threshold for that, the emotional neurons in the brain, or the centers in the brain, to get triggered, the amygdala, which is sort of the fear center in the brain, the threshold for it to get triggered is higher. So this means that the people and the things that used to annoy you or irritate you or trigger you, they more and more, they don't do that anymore. It takes a much higher stressful event to shake you. But strengthening our emotional networks also means that we become better with emotional intelligence. And this is our ability to keep track of our own emotions in real time, but also keep track of the emotions of the people around us. And very importantly, to be able to discriminate between the two so that we don't, it doesn't get fuzzy and we don't, get enmeshed in other people's emotions. And then we can respond a little more skillfully. And as you can imagine, this is really important in our relationships, whether that's relationships in our personal life or relationships at work. And then finally, the third network, and for me, this is the most exciting benefit of mindfulness, is that it strengthens our pro-sociality networks. And that's just a fancy way of saying our ability to empathize with others, our ability to put ourselves in somebody else's shoes, and then to respond in a way that is kind. So in other words, to be compassionate. So it more and more, as we practice, we develop the ability to move the center of focus away from ourselves and start asking, I wonder how this person around me is doing, and I wonder how I can help them in this moment. So many, many benefits. And we should not forget the very obvious physical benefits of mindfulness and compassion practice. So we now know from research that through practice, the levels of inflammation in our cells goes down. And inflammation in cells is sort of the starting point for a lot of chronic disease, things like heart disease and obesity and diabetes and autoimmune disorders and cancer and so on. And so mindfulness has this amazing ability through its activity on the stress response. As we are able to navigate our stress better, it means that the inflammation in our cells decreases, and then we protect ourselves from all of these diseases as well.
And when doing a mindfulness training or practice, what is the role of regularity if we were to do one full week of meditation versus a little bit every day? Sort of how does it work, and what is the ideal situation for really training ourselves in these capacities?
So regularity is key. Think of practicing mindfulness just like you would think of exercising your body. So, if you go to the gym one day and you have an amazing workout, that feeling afterwards when you feel good, you feel energized for the rest of the day, but then that effect wears off. And similarly with mindfulness, if you practice, say you practice for 5 minutes or for 10 minutes today, chances are you will feel calm and you will feel good for a little bit after that. But then, the chances of that effect translating throughout the day are pretty low. In order for you to experience a continued benefit of mindfulness, that is where regularity becomes really important. So the networks in the brain that we just spoke about, the mechanism of them getting strengthened is through something called neuroplasticity. So neuroplasticity is an amazing ability of our brain to continue to change dynamically throughout our lives till the day that we die. So what's happening is, even right now, whether we're being mindful or not, our networks are responding to the way that we think, what we say, and our behavior. It's responding to our environment. So for example, if we're working in a stressful job and we're exposed to these situations that trigger us daily, and if our usual reaction to that is anger or getting anxious, then that response is getting strengthened through this property of neuroplasticity in the brain every single day. So in essence, we are unconsciously practicing becoming anxious or stressed in a particular situation through that kind of response. And so the promise and the benefit of a regular practice is that you are now training a very different kind of neural connection. And you're training your brain to respond differently. And yes, that will take time, that will take regular practice, but you will start seeing those effects consistently down the line.
And when you're talking about a regular practice, is there a certain amount of time that would be ideal, or sort of the minimum to start to experience some of the benefits as well?
So this is a question that is asked very often, and unfortunately there's no answer to that. We don't have sort of a minimum viable dose, if you will, of mindfulness. A good rule to think about is that the more you practice, the better. But consistency of practice is more important than the dose or the duration, especially when you're starting your practice. So I would suggest that when you're beginning, even a minute of practice, but a minute that you do every single day and start to get into the habit of being mindful, is going to be more beneficial than practicing for an hour for 2 days and then dropping off and not continuing the practice. So start small, focus on building that sort of habit into your routine, and then you can go crazy. The sky's the limit. I mean, we have people who have practiced for 1,000 hours over their lifetime. We have people, the sort of Olympic champions, the Buddhist monks whose brains get researched in labs. This is where all of our research from that scientists do. They often take a look at the brains of these Buddhist monks, and these are Olympic champions, right? They have practiced for more than 60,000 hours. So the sky's the limit. You can get there, but I would say start small and build from there.
Yeah, and you mentioned making mindfulness a habit, and I know that you're well versed in the science of behavior change, and in my own experience, it can be difficult getting started with a practice, and then there's a sort of momentum that can pick up once you get started. And so I'm wondering if you could help us understand how we could use the science of building new habits to maybe start a daily practice and help that to continue us forward.
Sure, I'd love to. So yeah, I'm really interested in behavior change, and really it came from my own inability to adopt many habits. It came from noticing the fact that, as a physician, when we were giving advice to patients, and you could draw up an amazing lifestyle program, this is what you should eat, and this is how much you should exercise, and you need to manage your stress, and this is what you need to do, and coming up with an amazing plan. But then when patients came for follow-up, nothing had changed. And it wasn't like they didn't want to do it. They really wanted to make those changes in their lives. But when it comes to behavior change and building habits, it's simple, but it's not easy. But when you look at the science of behavior change, there are many things that need to sort of come together in an optimal way for us to be able to really thrive and build a habit successfully. And a simple way to think about it is 3 main areas. So the first is the skill itself. So whatever the habit that you're trying to build, first of all, you have to know how to do it correctly, like the technique has to be correct. So in the case of mindfulness and meditation, pick a good way to learn that technique. So maybe you are going to join a mindfulness class online, maybe there's an app that you're going to use, maybe it's going to be an in-person community, maybe that you have a program in your workplace. Whatever the case, identify, okay, this is how I'm going to actually learn to practice, and make sure that your source is credible. But this is where most of us sort of start and end. So we go to the class, we download the app, and we practice for a few days, and then we notice that, we're not doing it. So 2 other things need to come together, and that is optimizing your physical environment, and the third part is optimizing your social environment. So optimizing your physical environment means, how can you surround yourself with all the things that are going to help you maintain that habit? So what are the reminders? What is the technology that you can use to help you stick to your practice? But by the same token, what are the things that are getting in the way of your practice that you can remove from your environment? So for example, the physical things, an app is very helpful, because it's something that you have, you can have it on your phone. It's accessible at all times, so you can practice on your commute or when you have some breaks in the day. So you can optimize the time, even if you just have a few minutes to practice. On the go, you can set reminders on your calendar or reminders on your phone. You can actually build the practice into your routine like you would any other meeting. So that's a really good way to making sure that you do it every single day. But even start to look at how you're being mindful in the rest of your life, and how is your environment set up for it. So for example, even at work, what is the state of your desk? Is it chaotic, or is it a little, is there something that you can do to help sort of remind you that you want to come to that state of calm and focus, and maybe clearing out your desk or clearing out your drawers? And again, these simple cues in our environment can often be very helpful. The third thing is optimizing your social environment, and this simply means surrounding yourself with the people who again are either on the same path or want to practice or have been practicing for a while, or even if they're not practicing, people who will support you with this habit. So again, this could mean joining a community of practice, or maybe leaning on a mentor or a teacher that you have regular contact with. So again, how can you make sure that you feel supported whenever you're making a change? So whenever we're trying to build a habit, one thing is for sure: you will fail. You will have days when, no matter what you've learned, that you forget to do it or life gets in the way. And those are the days when you really need to lean on your social support and community. So whether it's a family member, a friend, or a larger community of practice that you can build around yourself, make sure you do that.
Thank you. That's so helpful. I'm also wondering if you could talk a little bit about the role of motivation and intention. And I'd also just love to hear a little bit about your story and how you came to practice mindfulness, how that's impacted your life, and what your motivation or inspiration to continue doing that is.
Sure. So maybe just a little bit about why I came to practice. I grew up in India, so I grew up with yoga and meditation all around me and in the culture. But growing up, I felt I was too cool for that and I didn't need it. So I did not learn it or try to practice it at all. It was only later when I went to medical school, and then when I moved to North America for my medical residency, and sort of had to face the challenges of a very grueling schedule, feeling burnt out at work. And also, sort of at the end of medical residency, there was a personal family crisis that I found myself in the middle of. And what I noticed was that in that moment, I felt really ungrounded, and I didn't know how to manage all these difficult emotions that were coming up for me. I was noticing that it was influencing my relationships with my family and with my friends. I didn't know how to manage my energy. And that's when I realized, okay, I need to figure out how to manage my stress a little bit better. And that's what got me interested in exploring meditation. And in the beginning, I tried many different practices, and honestly, nothing was sticking. And especially the focus-based practices, they just didn't seem to click. It was only when I tried a compassion practice that everything sort of fell into place, and I really resonated with that. So, and I think that's a good takeaway for folks as well, is that it's okay to try a few different things and notice, the practices that you're drawn to, and to use them as your anchor, because you can always build on top of that later. So it's not a question of like just sticking to one particular thing that maybe your friend is using. That may not be something that resonates with you, and feel free to try something else. And so for me, that was sort of the starting point, and that was about 15, 20 years ago. And again, my practice has varied. It was very sort of choppy in the beginning. There were phases of when I would practice consistently, and then phases when I would completely not practice. And again, it's been in the past few years that I've been able to build sort of a consistent daily practice, noticing the benefits it's had on my own health and well-being, my ability to manage my relationships with others. So that's why I'm such a huge fan, and that's why this is part of the work that we do at Wisdom Labs, where we bring these practices at scale in organizations, and we use the power of community that we just talked about, that very important aspect of social support that we need to help employees build their practice at work. But getting back to your question around motivation and intention, so this is, again, for me, when I was looking at behavior change, it was a part of behavior change that is often not understood or not paid attention to, but can make a huge difference. So intention for me simply means why. Why are you doing whatever you're doing? So in the case of mindfulness, why do you want to practice? And motivation is tied closely to intention, but motivation simply refers to your drive to do something. So, what is your drive to, today, for example, what's my drive to actually sit down and meditate? Now, what you'll notice is that motivation varies a lot Motivation can be up one day, you can feel really inspired to meditate, and the next day or even the next hour, even in the matter of a few minutes, something might come up and your motivation can take a deep dive, and you have absolutely no desire to meditate. So that's the first thing to keep in mind, that motivation kind of varies up and down. That is to be expected. We also need to know that there can be competing motivations. So maybe I wake up in the morning, I've tried to establish this morning practice, and I woke up feeling inspired to do it, but then I got a call from maybe a family member that an emergency had come up, or maybe I got some other news that I had to take care of something, maybe my child was sick. So whatever the case, so then there's a competing motivation, something else that requires your attention that is going to supersede your motivation for practicing. So, and that's okay, that's life, right? So how can we prepare for this or plan for this? And this is where intention kind of comes in. So to understand this, I'm going to talk a little bit about what's called the fast brain and slow brain. And this is a concept that a scientist called Daniel Kahneman sort of made famous. And what he noticed and what he studied was that very broadly, when we think about our motivations and the way that we behave in the world, the way that we make decisions, there seem to be two different aspects of our brain that come into play. So there's our fast brain, which is our subconscious or unconscious brain, which accounts for 95% of our behavior. So I'll just ask everyone to just sort of pause there and really take that to heart. So most of how we show up in the world every single day is dictated by our unconscious part of the brain, which is called the fast brain. This is the part of the brain that's tied to our emotional centers. This is a part of the brain where our habits and our routines reside. And this fast brain is motivated by survival. So the thing that the fast brain likes or pays attention to is things like your safety, your sense of reward, your sense of connection, your self-identity, your self-image, your values. So very basic needs for survival. That's what the fast brain cares about. And it's looking out for your survival and safety in any given situation. Your slow brain, on the other hand, is your conscious brain, and this accounts for about 5% of our daily behaviors. And this is your logical brain. This is the brain that makes New Year's resolutions. This is the part of the brain that you bring online when you use your willpower. This is a part of the brain that you use when you pay attention to something. And the reason it's called the slow brain is not because it's dumb. It's actually really wise, but it's just the connections and the connectivity is slower than that of the fast brain. And there's a good reason for that, because we have millions of bits of information coming at us every single second, and our brain has to make sense of all of that information very quickly so that we can survive in the world. And if we had to consciously think about everything every single second, we would not be able to do much. And so our unconscious or fast brain is the one that's taking all that information in very quickly, recognizing patterns and coming up with these routines and ways of responding and reacting. So how I'm sitting, how I'm speaking to you, my gestures, what I'm, how I'm going to get up and do most of the things today are based on the learning of that fast brain. So what does this have to do with intention and motivation? Our intention, if we make an intention from sort of our logical part of our brain, like I am going to meditate because, for example, say you went to your doctor and they said, you know what, your blood pressure is high, your cholesterol is high, you're headed towards heart disease, you need to manage your stress better. And so, maybe you should try mindfulness and meditation. And so you come home and you're like, yes, I need to take care of my health, and so I'm going to build a mindfulness practice. So that's a very slow brain, conscious intention that you've said, yes, I'm resolved to meditate. Unfortunately, in a moment of stress or when life comes at you, your fast brain is really not going to care about what your doctor said. So the fast brain is always going to override the motivations or intentions of your slow brain and go back to its own routine behavior and what it cares about. So, how can you think about your intention or change your intention to something that your fast brain will care about? So, in this instance, why do you want to be healthy? Well, I want to be healthy because I don't want to die soon. Okay. Why don't you want to die soon? Well, because there's so much I want to do with my life. I want to spend more time with my family. I want to spend time with my kids. I want to see them grow. And as you start asking this question of why, you will ultimately land on an emotionally charged reason that brings more meaning to whatever outcome you are looking for. So the outcome is, yes, I want better health, but the reason I really want better health is because I want to spend time with my family. I love them. And as you can imagine, even as I'm saying that, that has such an emotional charge. It's the love for my family that is the reason, that is the driving factor, that is the intention behind me wanting to be well and to practice. And so once we can identify that, then it's more likely that in a moment of stress or when we're feeling like, oh, I don't feel like practicing today, and just taking a minute to remind yourself of what is my intention here, it's then more likely that you will be inclined to practice.
Thank you so much. That was incredibly helpful to me personally. And it sounds like getting really clear about what your motivation and intentions are for doing a mindfulness practice, and both in a formal sense and then also the ways that you might want to be bringing that into your life, would be a really good way of actually getting started with forming that as an ongoing habit, if you will. Do you have any suggestions? I love what you just guided us through, but as far as how to get started with that, of identifying what your motivation or intentions might be?
Sure. So again, you might just want to just even writing down or just closing your eyes and taking a moment to reflect on, why do I want to do this? Why do I want to practice? And the question why is really helpful. And also sort of writing down, break down your goal. Whatever it might be. So I want to reduce stress. Well, there are so many different behaviors that you can do to reduce stress, and perhaps being mindful is just one of those behaviors. And then thinking about, okay, I want to be more mindful. What are the ways that I can be more mindful? And so I can be mindful by meditating. I can be mindful while eating. I can do a little more mindful walking. So as you start to break down those behaviors, then getting them down to that very small, very specific behavior that you can start to incorporate in a very practical way is usually very helpful. And this is also the work of Dr. B.J. Fogg, who's a Stanford psychologist, and he talks about tiny habits, which is his methodology. And really the idea there is, because we know that motivation varies so much, how can you pick the smallest possible behavior, which is really, really easy to do. So it requires hardly any motivation. And how can you make that a habit and then build from there? So one example might be, okay, I want to build a meditation practice, but maybe I'll start with just a couple of deep breaths. So as I mentioned, what is the sort of tiny behavior or tiny habit, as Dr. B.J. Fogg would call it, that you can start with? And one example I always give is, every time I unlock my phone, I'll take one breath or I'll take two breaths. And we check our phones about, I think, an average of 150 to 180 times a day. So that's, if you start to build that habit, that's 150 mindful breaths that you've gotten throughout the day without having to sit down and practice outside of it. So I think the takeaway that I want to share with folks is that start small. And also don't be afraid to iterate. So maybe you started with deep breathing, or maybe you started with a particular time of day of, yes, I'm going to get up in the morning and practice for a minute, but maybe that's not working out for you, and that's okay. So, try to become a designer in your own life of your habits, and say, okay, what's the next version of this design? What's the next version of this habit that I can play with? So maybe instead of the morning, I'm going to play with meditating at lunchtime. And try that out. Maybe there's a particular practice that you've been trying to follow on the app, and that's not really resonating with you. Try something different. Maybe you're feeling that you're feeling really uninspired. Well, go to an actual in-person class on mindfulness, or go online and check out one of the leading experts or speakers on mindfulness, and that can give you a boost of motivation and make you feel inspired. So there are many different things that we can do, but in general, I think get clear on your intention, start small, don't be afraid to iterate, and then very importantly, when things don't go the way that you had anticipated, be sure to be kind to yourself. That kind of self-compassion is also very important.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's incredibly helpful to be really clear about what your intention, motivation, and goals are in getting started. And I'm also curious about when that can become an obstacle, where it might feel like another thing on our to-do list, or we might be so focused on how we might be wanting to get somewhere or feel better or fix some aspect of ourselves through mindfulness, that it can actually take us out of the present moment, or out of actually genuinely connecting with the experience of the practice. Anything you could share with us about how to work with that particular challenge?
Yeah, and that's a really common one, right? And I think it's just sort of our culture of, I think we live in this culture of constant self-improvement, and we're never enough, no matter what we do. There's always something else that we need to achieve or strive for. So the first thing again is, well, how can we apply our mindfulness practice to the situation? So again, just being mindful, right? Bring this to mind. Bring how you're showing up in this present moment, or this trigger, or this desire, or this goal that you've created to mind, and see how it's showing up in your body. Noticing that instead of making you feel calm and focused, it's actually stressing you out even more, which is completely different from your intention in the first place. So the first thing is just to pause and to notice and to reflect on what's going on. And then I think this is a great place and time for the practice of self-compassion. And self-compassion simply means that, when we pause and we notice what we consider to be a failure or to be a flaw in ourselves, that is a moment for self-compassion. And that is a moment when we offer ourselves the same kind of kindness that we would offer a best friend. So in this instance, it's helpful to think, if this was my best friend who was struggling with this goal and they were striving, what advice might I give them? And then apply that same advice to your own self. And I think, once we do that, and we can take that pause and do that reflection, I think then we can sort of reset our intention, and sort of come back to, why am I actually doing this? What was the point behind this practice anyway? And then again, taking that time to notice that the things that are really valuable to us, that have that emotional charge to it, are usually very different from any kind of sort of goal setting or outcome related incentive that we might have for practice. So again, that will help us distinguish between the two, and just sort of take this moment to say, it's okay, this is my real intention, and as long as I'm progressing on this path, I should be okay.
Yeah, and I wanted to take a moment to sort of also expand the view of this to look at sort of the wider world, and how our own individual practice might be something that we can bring out in our relationships, and then also in our work and service. And so you've talked a lot in your work about alarming health and well-being trends that are emerging currently, like the global cognition crisis and the loneliness epidemic. And I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit to what's happening in the world at this moment in time, and how mindfulness might be something that can interact with that.
Sure. So when we look at the state of the world, it can be very disheartening. I'm sure everybody's noticing, everything from the climate crisis to what's happening in our political sphere, to all the, the anxieties that we have around our technology. And the global cognition crisis is a phrase or terminology presented by neuroscientist Adam Gazzaley at the University of California in San Francisco. And so he talks about, he's a cognitive scientist, and he talks about the fact that, with the current state of how we are learning and how we are learning not to pay attention. It's affecting our ability to manage not just the stress of our lives, but the way that we think in everyday situations. So we're easily distracted, we feel overwhelmed very quickly, we're losing our ability to make decisions properly, we are losing our ability to empathize, to be compassionate. And so this is what he's referring to when he talks about the global cognition crisis. And a lot of it sort of can be, has sort of arisen in parallel with our use of technology. So just taking this time for all of us to also acknowledge that technology is wonderful and it helps us do many amazing things, yet at the same time it exposes us to the risk of becoming addicted to our screens. We're noticing the effects of this kind of addiction in children, in teens, the effect that it has on this sort of addiction or relying on our social image more than our actual true inner values. It's affecting self-esteem of teenagers. The rates of anxiety and depression are rising, but it's also affecting adults, the rest of us. And we're noticing this epidemic of loneliness. And according to one study that was done a few years ago, 1 in 4 people in the US don't have a single person to turn to when something important happens in their life. And loneliness refers to not to the quantity of friends that you have, but to the quality of your relationships. And so I think our interactions with technology are definitely hurting that quality of our relationships, where we feel more comfortable texting someone or just staying on our social media rather than taking the time to have in-person, face-to-face interactions, which are very important for our, that kind of eye contact, that kind of reading of the body language is very important in building our capacities for empathy and compassion. So that's sort of the doom and gloom picture, and we've seen the fact that because we feel so overwhelmed by everything that's happening around us, it then affects, we're in this constant autopilot. We're not present, we're very reactive, and we also don't have a good way of dealing with our difficult emotions like anger and frustration and fear that come up when we live in a world like this. And so I think the role of mindfulness here is so important, because with mindfulness we have access to this inner technology that we can tap into no matter where we are, and that we can build and get better at. So it's a muscle that we can use and strengthen. And it allows us to then make better decisions in our personal life. So whether that's decisions for our health, how we're going to use our technology, our relationships with our family and friends or at work, but then decisions about our business. So how are we showing up? What are the kinds of products and companies that we're building? Is this helping the planet or taking away from it? And then of course, how the way that we show up in the world and the kinds of businesses that we build, how does that impact the climate crisis or just the planet in general? So I think mindfulness and mindful leadership, compassionate leadership, is sort of a key opportunity that we have, all of us, and you don't have to have a specific title to show up as a mindful or compassionate leader. You can have that sphere of influence no matter what kind of work you do or wherever you might be in the world. And again, it can get very paralyzing to think of, oh, now I have to change the world or come up with something amazing. And honestly, I think the best thing that we can do is just sort of, what is that sphere of influence around us? Just the 2, 3, 4 people around us that we can show up for in a more mindful and compassionate way helps to start spreading that movement and that contagion. And we know that emotions and compassion is contagious. So again, just starting with ourselves and then with our relationships around us, in my mind, can be a very powerful antidote to all of the messiness that we see ourselves facing in the world.
Thank you so much. I've so appreciated everything that you've shared today. And as we're coming to the end of this session, I'm wondering if there's anything else that you would want to offer to those watching about one way that they could get started with this today in a simple way as they move forward into their evening or morning, whenever they might be watching this, or anything else that you'd like to share?
Sure. So, just a couple of things, I think. One is to anyone who is starting this practice, congratulations. We're very happy that you want to explore a mindfulness practice. And I think just start small, start with, all of the things that we talked about today. What was the one thing that stood out for you? Maybe you've been inspired to download a mindfulness app. Maybe you've been inspired to go to YouTube and watch a video and learn more about mindfulness, or sign up for a program. So whatever the case might be, go ahead, take that small step and action today. And the other thing that I would love to offer is at Wisdom Labs, our goal and our aspiration is to be that agent of change and create this movement that I was talking about, so that globally we sort of have more mindful and compassionate cultures. And the way that we do that, our focus is the workplace. So we work with large and small companies globally to bring these practices through what we call Wise at Work communities. And these are employee-led programs within organizations. So, Wisdom Labs provides the content for employees to come together and by themselves practice, these 30-minute sessions every week, and create that kind of community and social support that is so important. And so what I'd love to offer everyone who is watching is that if you're so inspired, you can go to our website, wisdomlabs.com, and we now have an offering of virtual communities. So even if your workplace does not offer this, come explore mindfulness with us virtually, and it's a free offering that we have, where you can connect with a mindfulness instructor from Wisdom Labs every week for half an hour, connect with others who are on the same journey as you are, and start to practice. And as part of that program, you also get access to our Wise at Work app, where you have hundreds of different kinds of techniques and mindfulness practices for every situation of your daily life. So this is my invitation and offer to everyone watching. Come explore mindfulness and compassion with Wisdom Labs if you're so inspired to do.
No, that's such a great offer for folks. And we'll make sure to put a link to the website and to that area below this video so that people can access it easily.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you again so much.
Thank you. My pleasure.